What is going on, guys? Blacklisted Voice episode 52. Technically, this is take two, I guess. The other one, my internet literally just cut out. We're here with Sarah Ganka, who works at Stat Health and Wellness in Atlanta, Georgia. How's it going, Sarah?
Good, good. Thanks for having me on. I'm excited and nervous to be here.
Yeah, for sure. So Sarah, tell us a little bit more about kind of what you do. I guess just give us a rundown or intro of what you kind of do for a living.
Awesome. Yeah. So I am a registered dietitian. I work at Stat Wellness, which is the nation's first medicine and movement facility. So we do functional medicine, which is a root cause medicine where, we might look at somebody's health history and conditions, and we try to figure out what is actually causing those diseases. And then we also really prioritize movement as a piece of wellness. And that's actually what STAT stands for, is the strength to achieve total wellness. So super cool, just thing that our founder, Dr. Kristen Oja started. And so as the facilities dietitian, I work on the nutrition piece with our members and with people who aren't members, but want to come in and work one-on-one with nutrition components with somebody. So I do a lot of different things, work with a lot of different people and a lot of different health conditions. But lately, I've really been working with a lot of women who want to prioritize just weight maintenance, or what I like to call body recomposition, which we can totally talk about more as we get going. But I love just helping people put the pieces together on how to build more nutritious balance into their lives just to support their best health.
Yeah, for sure. So that's very cool. So you guys kind of take a bigger picture approach than just kind of like, hey, maybe we saw this inside your blood marker. Let's travel down the path of fixing this, where that might have just been like a symptom. You guys kind of look at global picture of what might be causing that symptom.
Yes. Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
It's cool. Yeah. And I found out about the practice because I was a patient there first. I had a ton of GI related issues and ended up working with Kristen, and just have seen such a revolution in my own health. And, even as a provider, sometimes I feel like I should have the answers and I should figure this all out by myself, but it really does take a team approach. And there's so much power in having another set of eyes on your own health and wellness. And once I visited there as a patient, I was hooked and basically emailed Kristen a year later and was like, I'll do whatever it takes to become ready to work for you. And I'll wait however long it takes to get there. And I'm very grateful to be on board now.
Yeah. So when somebody comes and sees you guys, is it like all you guys are treating one patient, or is it like one doctor kind of oversees the patient and there's like, hey, we need to send you to Sarah, or we need to send you to our movement specialist? Or does that kind of make sense?
Yes. Yeah. So anyone who's coming in and wants to kind of do a membership, which is a 12-month commitment towards like their health and wellness journey, they'll see one of our providers. So we have 3 on staff that are nurse practitioners, amazing credentialed professionals who do the lab work, kind of do an initial meeting with someone, figure out, what's going on with their health history and what pieces of the puzzle we might be missing. What tests they would recommend running. And then after that, they would usually recommend meeting with me, the dietitian. And then in the membership, also we have health coaches who really help put together the day-to-day, just all of the intricacies that go into better wellness and things like, how do I manage time around working out or preparing meals to take to work, or practically what does it look like to balance certain supplements with like certain medications and things too. So like kind of cool whole picture. And then, based on anyone's underlying conditions, we absolutely also have in-house physical therapists, personal trainers that we can refer to for specific like movement patterns and therapies as well.
That's very cool.
Yeah.
What would you say like the average age range is that you guys end up treating?
Yeah. Gosh, that's such a good question. We treat all ages. My
Mhm.
youngest patient that I've seen just turned 13, and my oldest patient that I've seen is in his early 80s. And so really an age range. For me, I find that the majority of my patients are in their 30s to early 40s, and
Okay.
mostly women kind of coming in that feel like they've got some underlying like hormonal imbalance is probably what I'm seeing the most.
Okay. So you said, so you mostly deal with kind of like hormone imbalances then.
Yes, yes, which doesn't mean that I'm an expert because it's very, very complex and I'm still learning every day.
For
But
sure.
that is like definitely more what my passion and what my focus is.
Yeah, yeah. So, and you'd mentioned that you kind of deal with like body recomp. Is that how you phrased it?
Yeah, yeah, and I kind of came across this term recently, I guess more in the like the wellness industry, and I love it because so many people come in frustrated that they feel like they've gained a lot of weight and they can't lose
Mhm.
it, and then
Mhm.
when you think about weight loss, it's like, well, we don't want to lose weight because I've like amputated your arm, or we don't want to lose like your muscle, right? Like it's like
Yeah, yeah,
like weight loss might not be the best descriptor for what the goal is. And so,
yeah, yeah.
like I think body recomposition is just a healthier mindset because it allows us to really focus on prioritizing gaining muscle and then working on losing excess body fat that might not be
Yeah.
healthy for that person.
Yeah, yeah. So my background comes a little bit from like CrossFit gym classes.
Yeah.
And our majority of our clientele has kind of shifted more into competitive CrossFitting.
Okay.
But I always try and tell people like, look, the number on the scale isn't the biggest deal in the world. It's gonna like you might start exercising and it might stay the same. What we want to see is more so the body fat percentage coming down into a healthy range, and that's where like a good marker of health and performance is kind
Yeah.
of like a good indicator, if that makes sense.
Yes, totally. I love that framework because I think it really empowers people to focus on improving, like gaining a number on the scale. And that's muscle mass, and
Yeah,
that's something
yeah.
that's so important and so empowering when we can, look at that instead of, all the other numbers that tend to, I don't know, just be depressing and frustrating and a bunch of different host of emotions.
Yeah, yeah. So you're not really focused on things so much as like BMI or like number on the scale. You're more focused on like lean body mass and like body fat percentage
Yeah,
number.
totally.
Okay.
Totally. And especially with a group of patients that I see. And once I really get women in who are in their early 40s and approaching that perimenopausal period, I
Mhm.
really want to emphasize that because while it is not impossible to gain muscle in menopause, it gets a lot harder because of hormone
Okay.
changes. And
Interesting.
so, like, really focusing on how do we prioritize building muscle while there's still like supportive hormones on board to really help leverage that work is so beneficial. And so a lot of times for women, I'm like, I don't even want to talk about the weight loss. I mean, I'm much more kind about it than that, right? But it's
Yeah,
like
yeah.
if that number on the scale doesn't go down, as long as we're increasing the muscle, that might not be a bad thing. And then
Yeah.
later we can maybe work on the fat loss piece, but only if we can really make sure as much as possible that it's not at the expense of muscle mass.
Okay. So I guess my basic understanding of what happened during menopause was your I thought that your estrogen levels started to come down and your testosterone levels started to rise. And maybe we should get into like hormone explanation before we start
No,
diving.
that's okay. That's okay. From my understanding, both estrogen and testosterone tend to decrease
Okay, got it.
in that perimenopausal and that menopausal period, and both estrogen and testosterone can help drive muscle building.
Right. Okay. So that makes sense why muscle building becomes a little bit harder for women during that time period.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. Got it. Got it.
Yeah, great question.
Yeah, I figured it would have been a little bit easier to put on muscle mass during that time period, because I thought it was like a kind of like an inverse relationship for women at that time. But if both are dropping, that definitely makes sense.
Yeah, totally.
No. So okay, so you said you're not an expert on hormones, but you definitely have started to get into a little bit more, like kind of diving down that rabbit hole.
Yeah.
But could you just give us like a brief explanation of kind of what hormones are, and maybe like the top three that the internet did not just cut out here again?
I think we're good. We caught up.
Oh, there we go. Okay, sweet.
Yeah,
Did you get the question?
I heard, yeah.
Okay.
Top three hormones, maybe in kind of overview of what they are.
Yeah.
I might do top four hormones if that's okay.
Okay. Yeah, totally.
Cool. So generally speaking, when we're talking about hormones, they're chemical messengers. And it's basically like your body, parts of your body telling other parts of your body what to do. And it's kind of cool because when we talk about metabolism, specifically, hormones are one of the messengers that help your metabolism adapt to different situations, right? So key ones to pay attention to, and ones that I think are pretty important. We've talked about two of them already, or mentioned them. That's estrogen and testosterone. So, testosterone is the major male sex hormone. Females actually also produce large amounts of testosterone in relation to the other hormones. So it is a large hormone for women as well. I maybe should say prolific. I don't know. I'll find a better word later. But females, what we can actually get into sometimes even is high testosterone, and that's when you start to see metabolic disorders like PCOS, which is something we could totally talk more about later. But in general, what testosterone is going to do is help regulate sex drive, help with muscle strength, and actually helps with fat distribution in the body. So you might see if your testosterone is low, for men, that could be a decrease in sperm production and loss of hair. For women, there can be like loss of hair as well, specifically around like where your kind of crease of your hair ends up being around your hairline. And then higher testosterone in men, sometimes the signs for that are things like aggression, irritability, and acne. And then in women, it can also cause acne, again, hair loss. So for women, whether it's too high or too low, we're losing hair. It's very unfortunate. And then, I know, short end of the stick on that one. But then what ends up happening is we can develop more hair on the face, on the chest, and more acne, especially around the jawline with testosterone imbalances. Estrogen is kind of what we think of as the primary female hormone. It's produced mainly in the ovaries, and then in the perimenopause and menopausal time period, your adrenals actually kick on board, and they end up producing estrogen. It's responsible for things like menstruation, reproduction, sex drive, and bone health for women. So having healthy levels of estrogen are what really drives a lot of those things. And again, it's kind of like the Goldilocks effect. Like if we have too high estrogen, especially if we have higher levels of estrogen that hasn't been broken down or metabolized well, we get increased risk for cancers. And then low estrogen, again, it's back to that thinning hair, lower libido, acne type of picture as well. So those are kind of two of the main sex hormones. And then we talk about other hormones that kind of really play a role in our metabolic health. Insulin and cortisol are main pictures there. And insulin, we kind of forget that it's a hormone. But it is a hormone. So it's very much in that endocrine system of the body, that hormonal system of the body. It is what helps keep blood sugar balanced. It is what converts glucose to energy. And it's hugely important because it is what makes us take our carbs, our blood sugar, and turn that glucose into energy for our muscle specifically. So we're really talking about, exercise, when we're talking about muscle building, having, good levels of insulin on board is crucial. And then cortisol is the other big one. And it is primarily a stress hormone. Doesn't mean that that's a bad thing, because we need kind of low levels of stress in our body, what we would call hormetic stress, to help us function, to keep us alive. It's very important. But that is one of the hormones that we see kind of in excess often when we're getting into like these really high stress states and high stress situations.
Yeah. So these are kind of like the 4 that you're focusing in on more so for people that come into your clinic. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so where would you say like the biggest imbalances? And I think, there's some aspect to all of them affecting each other. But where do you start kind of looking and trying to find imbalances?
Yeah, this is such a good question. So I would say in my practice, especially when it's related to like the nutritional component, a lot of times it goes back to the insulin. Because as we age, our sensitivity to insulin might get worse, which means that we have to produce more insulin to do the same job, which just puts more of a strain on the body, right? And this is where you get into blood sugar imbalances, and where eventually down the road, you can get into metabolic disruptions like type 2 diabetes, or, oh gosh, now I'm totally drawing a blank. Metabolic syndrome is another one of those, where you have like higher amounts of insulin, and blood sugar abnormalities.
Okay. So, sorry, I have a little bit of a question there. So like when you said, the body, it's harder for the body to perform activities over time, you have to maybe secrete more insulin. So like somebody who's been secreting high levels of insulin, maybe for a decade, like, 20s to 30s, and now all of a sudden, it's going to be harder for them to continue to produce that insulin, or is it more so their body's not able to uptake the insulin as easily? Does that kind of make sense? Or
Yeah, so it's hard. So you kind of get to a point where your body won't produce it. It's like maxed out on the amount of insulin it can produce. And the work of that insulin kind of maxes out too, because I heard this analogy, and I wish I remember who to give it credit for, because it's one of the best analogies I've ever heard for this. But it's like when you are going on vacation and you're packing a suitcase, your suitcase is like your cell. So we'll say that's the muscle cell. And insulin is like you, and the clothes are your glucose. So like insulin wants to put the glucose, you want to put your clothes in the suitcase. Well, over time, the more you start to cram clothes in the suitcase, the more glucose gets into the cells. And then it's like this whole cascade effect, because the more glucose gets into the cells, the more you have to also produce insulin to put more glucose into the cells. And so it's kind of like eventually you get this overstuffed suitcase that's like just no bueno when it comes to your metabolic and your overall health.
And then like I guess going off of that analogy, like you'd have to get a second suitcase and start filling that up type thing.
Totally. And really, when we look at the whole system of the body, it's like our insulin, like we're packing a whole bunch of suitcases, and eventually you can't pack the suitcase anymore.
Got it.
You have like high blood sugar, and that's when you run into, long-term problems. Type 2 diabetes is definitely what that is called. And that extra glucose in the blood leads to things like heart disease, vision problems, all sorts of just body breakdown as far as its like physiological function.
Okay. That makes sense. So what types of things do you start trying to do if you see somebody who's coming in with, insulin as like kind of maybe like the driving factor of kind of their hormone imbalances?
Yeah, totally. So goes back to blood sugar balance, which if we are mindful of the amount of carbohydrates we're putting into our body, then that can help with insulin production.
Okay.
There's a lot of tedious little things that we could totally talk about because for every person, it's different.
Okay.
For some people, it's like they're eating maybe like the right amount of carbs, but it might be that they're getting all of those carbohydrates at one time of the day. Or maybe even they're spreading those carbs out and kind of snacking or grazing all day. And by doing that, we're stimulating more and more insulin in the body. And so the body gets less sensitive to insulin by the end of the day. For some people, it could be that there really is an imbalance of the amount of carbohydrates they're getting in. What's really interesting is that both too much carbohydrates and too little carbohydrates can both drive that insulin resistance picture.
Can you talk a little bit more about the too little?
Yeah. So essentially, like your body wants to be very, very effective and very efficient. And if we are not eating a lot of carbohydrates, like someone who's doing a more like modified or like strictly ketogenic diet, for example, not getting a lot of carbs. So the body's like, okay, I'm not getting a lot of carbs, actually don't need to make any insulin. So then when that person introduces carbs, all of a sudden the body has to mass produce a lot of insulin because that regulation of how much insulin to kind of like chronically produce gets off kilter, off balance.
Okay. Quick side, I guess, question.
Yeah.
So because your body's not producing insulin, would it be harder to, I'm sorry, let me backtrack here.
There's a lot of things we can kind of pick up.
So if you're on a keto diet, which is you keep your carbs minimal, fats high, if that's correct. Is it harder for individuals to put on muscle mass if they're on a keto diet?
Yes, from all of the research that I have done, yes, because carbohydrates are the primary source of fuel for muscles.
Okay.
And so that is like when I work with people who are very, very active. And it's interesting, and this might be slightly ahead of conversation, but I feel like it's totally like appropriate to go there now.
Okay.
So if someone's like working out a lot, and this is something that I see all the time in my practice, especially with women coming in and they're like, I just can't make the scale budge. I'm holding on to all of this like fat around my abdomen. I feel like I keep gaining fat around my abdomen. I've decreased my carbs and I'm doing like 6 hours in the gym every single week, like going up on weights and nothing's budging. So what that ends up doing is it's several different things. Some of it is that insulin piece, right? It's like we're probably not producing the right amount of insulin, but we're also stimulating a very, very high stress environment for the body. And that's where that cortisol piece comes in.
Okay. Yeah.
So it's like, so when our bodies are in stress, we should like high levels of stress, we should could almost think synonymously as like survival mode, regardless of how your mental state is. Like excessive physical activity in a place that's not fueled well is a very high stress environment. And so that can drive stress, that can drive insulin imbalances. And then that does end up causing more weight gain.
Yeah. So I think this is, I guess, where a lot of competitive CrossFitters end up sitting is they're highly underfueled for their exercise, their performance, etc. Their performance is very high intensity, very stressful on the body, and they're doing it for multiple hours a day. So where, like, do you have any guidelines for individuals who are kind of like in that stressed out state, maybe not seeing, maybe they're trying to get stronger, but they're, not putting on any muscle mass, or, maybe their workouts are starting to suffer and they're not performing well in the gym, maybe the recovery is suffering now. What are
Yeah.
some kind of signs that like your cortisol levels are too high, and that's also affecting your insulin levels? Does that
Yeah.
question kind of make sense?
That's a great question. So primary one is if you're like, I can't get rid of the abdominal fat, just feels like it keeps like packing on. That's
Mhm.
tends to be like a pretty good signal.
Okay.
Other signals of how you feel in your body, if you're, like those intensive workouts, like I would be shocked if somebody left and was like, I could run a marathon also, right? So it's,
Yeah.
so it's like obviously like that is going to deplete energy. But on a chronic level, it's like, is that really pulling more energy than you feel like you have to give? Like, are you waking up energized like after you sleep, or do you feel like you
Okay.
just cannot get over that like feeling of just like extreme fatigue
Mhm.
and just that like slow output, like feeling like you're sluggish? Brain fog might honestly even be like a kind of sign that some of that's happening too. Just the really extreme exhaustion.
Okay. So extreme exhaustion is kind of like what you're looking at from that standpoint,
Yeah, yeah.
like not waking up feeling fully recovered.
Yeah.
Is there things like waking up in the middle of the night too, or
It could be. And what's interesting about that is that that can also go back to blood sugar imbalances,
okay.
especially if you're waking up overnight sweating.
Oh,
Usually a sign that your blood sugars actually dropped too low. Um,
okay.
and so yeah, you've got kind of low blood sugar issues, and that's a survival response in the body. It'll wake us up, cause us to sweat to basically dilute your blood so that your blood sugar comes back up. That's kind of like how the whole sweating thing
Oh,
happens.
so it's trying to get rid of like plasma basically?
Basically any extra fluid that's not like red blood cells. Yeah, it's from what I understand.
Okay.
Yeah.
To
It's
try and like
about like
to
it's all about the balance of like the sugar in the blood. Yeah.
oh, that's crazy. That's really cool.
Yeah, yeah. So if that's happening, then that's definitely, an indication. And even if that's happening and you're not experiencing extreme fatigue, could
Mhm.
be an indication that we don't have enough carbohydrates on board for the level of activity that you're doing.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that's pretty cool. I think it's so crazy how like we have all this modern technology and yet it's still like an ancestral thing of like, hey, you're in a fight or flight or survival mode.
I
Like
know. I know. And what's so fascinating about that, so if like hormones and understanding hormones better is like one of my passions, my second and third passion are like the gut brain axis and like the
Mhm.
neurobiology of how we function and like our stress and our food, right? And it's like we have so many technological advances now, and we are
Yeah.
exposed to so many stressors. I mean, I feel like even just sitting here while we're chatting, like I've accidentally in the background noticed my phone go off like 5 different times, right?
Right.
And I'm like, what is that? Is it an email? Does my family need something? Like
Yeah.
I need an urgent work task that I forgot about. And so, thankfully, if anyone from work is listening to this podcast right now, I'm got all the check boxes for today. Um, but our brains, our reptilian brains, that primitive stress response truly doesn't differentiate between a work
Mhm.
email and outrunning a bear in the woods. It is the same
Right.
thing. And so it is like we are constantly in that fight or flight mode, and that does just make it hard to really effectively build muscle, build tissue, and stay in that more like building up that anabolic state.
Yeah. So I guess maybe you would send over to your health coaches for this, but do you do like lifestyle interventions with individuals that are having, high insulin and high cortisol levels or low
Totally.
as well?
Totally. And I'm actually also a registered yoga teacher.
Okay.
So I did my 200-hour training in the city, and I'm not actively teaching in a studio right now, but I do still also educate on some of those principles in sessions with clients, and just how important like the breath work, the meditation, like, the recovery days are for our overall wellness and for
Mhm.
our performance, because if we're not rested, we're not going to be able to perform to the best of our abilities.
Yeah, yeah. And that kind of goes back to more of like almost like a parasympathetic, sympathetic balance of the nervous system. Is that kind of
Totally.
correct or?
Totally.
And do you kind of go into that a lot with your clients as well, or?
Yeah. And one of my most favorite things to educate on when it comes to kind of the overlay of all of those. So parasympathetic and sympathetic are like two sides of the same coin.
Mhm.
You've got your sympathetic, your fight or flight response, also known as like the fight, flight, freeze, or fawn response, which neurobiologists and neurotheologists could totally say way more about than I can. And
Yeah.
then your rest and digest is that parasympathetic.
Mhm. Mhm.
So all of those signals run from the same nerves. It's just like you're turning on one side more often, or you're turning on the other side. And what happens, and where I like to really educate, is like when we think about digestion, one of our primary nerves is the vagus nerve,
Mhm.
and it runs from the brainstem through the diaphragm, and it actually innervates or touches every single digestive organ in our body. That nerve is responsible for, in that fight or flight response, it's going to turn off digestion. So
Mhm.
one of the things that's really interesting about that and about stress is like it'll actually shut down the body's production of insulin as well in a high stress response. It's very protective, right? Because if we are constantly outrunning a predator, then we need to be able to have ready supplies of blood glucose for that energetic function of survival. And then if we are not in that fight or flight, if we're in the rest and digest, that's when we do actually effectively utilize, digest all of our foods, right? And so it's like, what I kind of tell people is like, you can't be in one and expect for the other to function really well.
Yeah,
Right.
right.
And so most of the time we're in that fight or flight. And so digestion is just like terrible. It's like we've got bloating, we've got IBS, we've got like mineral and vitamin deficiencies. And I wouldn't be surprised, I can't categorize like how much of that is that like constant fight or flight response, but I know that a large part of that can definitely play into digestive issues.
For sure. And more so, especially in like today's day and age where, like you just said, I looked at my phone 5 times during a 30-minute conversation, and like your
Yeah.
cortisol levels are like up
Yep.
now because of it.
Yeah.
It just seems like in today's day and age, we can never fully shut off. And then I guess from a competitive CrossFitter standpoint, like you couple that in with, 3 super intense workouts a day
Yeah.
sometimes, or 2 super intense workouts a day. It's really, really hard to come back down out of that sympathetic state.
Yeah.
Um, so,
And I think, when it really does, I mean, I have the utmost respect for the competitive, like CrossFitting and just like competitive professional athletic community, because when you are in that level of work, eating is your second job. It's just,
yeah,
it like you really have to feel well. And like, we all have our basic metabolic rate. So if we just existed for a day, like digest our food, woke up, took a couple walks around, like, just what we need to survive and function. And for, very competitive, like very, strong endurance and heavy lifting athletes, you almost got to double or triple that for the
yeah,
amount of work that is being done. And that's a really hard task. I mean, when you think about getting all those macronutrients in to like upwards of like 2,000, 3,000 calories, that is
yeah,
work.
yeah.
Like that's a big task. And so it makes sense that it's really hard for people to do that.
For sure. And then to almost think about it too, like, so you have, one, you have like stressors going on throughout the course of your day. Then you have like 3 hours worth of training. Then you're
Yeah.
trying to digest all your food and actually
Yeah.
get the nutrients into the system. Like it
Yeah.
starts actually, it adds up to a lot. And like,
It does.
I think people miss out on that perspective, and CrossFitters are always like very type A individuals. So they're always constantly wanting to do more, do more, do more, when
Yeah.
a lot of the times trying to get them to back off a little bit is where us as coaches come in, and trying to get them to understand like, hey, this section of the season is, we're trying to repair the body, restore the body, and your body can only handle this for so long,
Yeah.
and before it's going to start to break down. So we need to make sure that you're pushing during this time of the season, and we're maintaining and kind of building bases in this time of the season.
Yeah,
Um,
totally. I mean, it's so that recovery phase is so important. And one of the things that it's kind of like frequently a reminder for myself in my life is how,
Mhm.
instead of trying harder, how do I try a little bit softer? Like, how do I
Mm.
give myself, like, at times, like some of that space to take the
Mhm.
pressure off, to take the weight off, to take the day off, it's
Yeah.
like when I need it, and trusting that all of the work I've done, it's like, we don't get to where we are in one day. We're not going to lose it in that
Yeah.
amount of time, but I think it
Right.
can be, there's a lot of fear sometimes associated with, like, if I take a break, can I get back into this safely and effectively and efficiently? And that's
Yeah.
very valid concerns.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I almost wonder too if some of that is just from, everything's so instant nowadays. Like we instantly get an email, instantly we
Yeah.
post on Instagram, get instant response to it. I almost wonder if that's kind of like feeding into that, is like, hey, if I can get it, the dopamine hit really fast, can I also lose it really fast?
Yeah. Yeah. That makes sense. And you know what? I am working with women on that, and anyone really, on the body recomposition. And one of my recent patients, really like super nice, younger man, I think he was in his early 40s. We were
Mhm.
chatting a lot. He also wanted to lift more. But
Okay.
he, same thing. He was like, I keep building up fat around my belly, and I'm just like in the gym a lot and all this. Well, I do a diet recall, and he's getting maybe 1,000 calories a day.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
And just thinking that that was the right thing to do. And when it comes to that point too, what you don't want to do is all of a sudden drastically just go to the 3,000 calories.
Yeah. Okay. Yep.
Kind of got to slowly build up your tolerance to that
Mhm.
amount of intake over time. Because, if you're, because our metabolisms are incredibly adaptive.
Mhm.
So it's like his metabolism has adapted to that amount of intake and that amount of effort. So it's
Mhm.
very much like trying to preserve his life by holding on to body fat, by, like,
Mhm.
and certain other energetic functions were lost, right? Like he had a lot of brain fog and fatigue, felt
Mhm.
like he wasn't able to perform as well at his job, right? So other functions were suffering. And
Yeah.
when you are at that point, like, you do have to kind of slowly build up, because if you all of a sudden increase a bunch more calories, you are going to gain a lot more weight, right?
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
a
Yeah.
really slow and kind of tedious process. As much as gaining weight can be that, slow and tedious process, so can losing it the right way.
Yeah. Yeah. So when you have somebody who's coming in under eating, like what, maybe uh maybe not as severely as this individual was,
Yeah.
but maybe they're under eating by uh 500, 600 calories a day consistently, and you kind of have to build them back up into a metabolism. Like how long are you looking at that taking?
Yeah. Months is the short answer. I typically recommend no more than around 50 extra calories a day
Okay.
for like about a week, maybe two, and then another 50 calories for 1 to 2 weeks, and then another like 50 calories for 1 to 2 weeks. And you know what that looks like, just practically, that's like one extra serving of carbs a day. It's
Mhm.
not that much in the grand scheme of things, but it's
Right.
enough to start to fuel the body better and get the body more used to what's coming in, so that it can more
Mhm.
efficiently use everything that is available.
For sure. So that is obviously like a long process for
Oh,
it's not, but it is.
it is.
Uh,
It is. And I think that's one of the things that's really frustrating for a lot of people. And especially, like, I have several clients now who are like, okay, I'm eating better and I'm maintaining my weight. Great. Like, when do we start the body recomp? And I'm like, maybe not for a while. Like, we want to
yeah.
really hold here and build that trust and build that chronic nourishment in the body before we start to really talk about like the fat loss, which is another metabolically expensive process. So
For sure, for sure. Yeah, yeah. So I guess like bringing it back,
yeah.
maybe testosterone and estrogen. So if you're sitting with kind of like higher insulin levels or high cortisol levels, what is that doing to testosterone and estrogen then?
Such a great question. I don't have the answer exactly for that. Um,
Okay.
what I can say is that some of the interplay that ends up happening, is when, so again, in that, for women in that perimenopausal period, when estrogen starts to decline, the the ability for the body to effectively utilize insulin also declines. So you do kind of get more of that insulin resistance piece, which is why like targeting the right amount of carbs to help build muscle can be so important, and why it can take a little bit of trial and error to figure out what the right amount for each person is.
Okay. Got it.
Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, so it's definitely not like a one size fits all type situation.
Yes. Yeah. And when we're talking about like macronutrients specifically, like some people feel like they might function best around 20% carbs. Some people might feel like they function best around 40%. And it really is like, it's your amount of activity, it's the intensity with which you're doing that, and it's kind of where your hormones are. And that's the frustrating thing about this process is we are our own science experiments. And when it comes to science experiments, like there's usually a lot of trial and error before you kind of finally start to figure out a little bit of a rhythm that works. And then it's like guaranteed 3 months down the road, something will shift and you'll need to shift with it. Right. It's like a constantly dynamic system.
Right.
That's kind of why I like to educate around informed intuitive eating. Like here's what's happening with your metabolism, with your hormones, with your body. And based on knowing that, what do you think's going on? And I feel like 9 times out of 10, people are like, I think I'm under fueling. And I'm like, I think you might be right. And so then so then we kind of like, play around with that a little bit. And my role is really to support people in confirming like what they are realizing is true about what they need.
For sure. So what are some big things, I guess, that you see that kind of throw off these hormone profiles? I know we've touched a lot on under eating. Are there some other things that kind of come into play, or?
So much stress is a big one. Stress is a really big one. Undernourishment is a big one too, right? If we're constantly at a calorie deficit, that can absolutely throw off hormones. Environmental toxins is a huge one. And I think this is actually really, really important for men and women. We have so many xenoestrogens in our environment, these compounds that mimic estrogen like activity in the body. And that can do a lot of damage to hormones and a lot of damage to people when it comes to kind of holistic wellness and just feeling good. That hormonal disruption can do anything from decrease in sex drive to, again, like back to those hormonal imbalances, hair loss, more acne. And so what I've kind of really, there's a lot of resources out there for kind of finding the best products and the most like body friendly, I guess you could say clean products is probably like a good phrase there. I don't like to use that phrase for food for different reasons, but that's a whole other podcast episode.
Yeah, for sure.
But clean products, right? So the EWG, the Environmental Working Group, is a great resource for looking like, does your laundry detergent have like endocrine disruptors that can throw off hormone balance? For a lot of people, it's plastic use. We just have a ton of plastics.
Right.
And then a lot of times it's also like fragrances, like we love fragrances and things, but those are endocrine disruptors as well. So it's like, you want to go for the free and clear and like the glass containers is kind of what I tell people to help with that for sure.
Can you chat a little bit more on the fragrances and like what an endocrine disruptor like means specifically?
Yeah. So I don't remember exactly what it is about fragrance, other than it's like they are also compounds or chemicals, and like our hormones are chemicals, like these fragrances are chemicals, and like our taking in those chemicals can interfere with the pathway of how hormones effectively communicate. And that is what I mean by like an endocrine disruptor. And our skin is actually like the largest organ of our body. So if we're constantly like touching, absorbing, like taking in certain things through our skin, like some of these synthetic fragrances, lotions, even we could talk about like aluminum deodorant that way potentially, right? Those things can have a little bit of an impact on your hormone system. For
sure. So people kind of have to be careful about like almost everything that they're doing on a day-to-day basis right now.
Now, here's the thing. Everybody has different tolerance to the amount of like kind of added stuff that they can handle in their environment.
Oh,
And a
okay.
lot of different things have to do with that. Like if someone has a really super healthy gut, like they haven't really taken a ton of antibiotics in their life, like they, eat a well balanced meal, they're getting plenty of fiber, they exercise moderately well, drink good water, like not putting a lot of toxins in their body. If they might be able to drink out of plastic water bottles every day and it's like not a problem, right?
Oh,
But
yeah.
then somebody who like maybe lives in a house that has a lot of mold, or like maybe they were on a lot of antibiotics and they have pretty significant gut disruption, that their immune system is kind of out of balance, then
Mm,
they're going to be more sensitive to those things. It's like we have the capacity as resilient organisms to deal with toxins. That's like part of what surviving life is.
right,
But if
right.
you already have a ton of toxins, then like even more can kind of tip the boat the wrong way for some people.
Yeah, okay, that makes sense. Yeah, yeah. So it's kind of like a compounding factor, right?
Totally, totally.
Okay, that
And
makes sense.
realistically, we are not going to get away from those environmental things. Like we just live in it,
Right.
right? Where it's like we're just not going to get away from it. And so that is like, again, back to what I like to educate and really am passionate about, like how do you set your body up for the most success when it comes to everything you're going to experience. And that really does go back to just fueling yourself well, taking care of your microbiome, eating a lot of fiber, getting good protein and fats and good starchy carbs, and then the stress piece, right? Like it would be horrible if you left listening to this podcast and started stressing out about all the environmental topics, because like
Yeah, right.
it's just going to make things worse.
Yeah, yeah. So I guess on that note, like what are some things that you can do to kind of like bring down your stress levels on a day-to-day basis, or
Yeah.
maybe you do want to try and clean up some of your environmental stuff, or
Yeah.
help fix your gut microbiome, or
Yeah.
what is it
Yeah.
like?
Get so many good questions. So when it comes to like stress in general, I do recommend like a mindfulness practice. Now,
Mhm.
for people who have a hard time sitting still, it doesn't mean that you have to just like not think about anything, right? And I think that meditation can get that kind of bad rap. It's like, well, I can't just clear my mind. Well,
Yeah.
meditation is more about learning to observe the inner workings of your mind and the inner workings of yourself. And so
Mhm.
for some people that might feel like taking a 5-10 minute walk and just instead of tuning into a podcast, unless it's this one, of course,
Yeah.
or, instead of like scrolling the phone, like just counting your breath while you're taking those steps,
Okay.
or taking a minute, even a minute before you eat your meal, grounding down, centering, take a deep breath in, maybe for the count of 4, and then a long exhale for the count of 6. Like anything that kind of brings your awareness back into your body, back into your breath is awesome for like stress-based and like mindfulness-based practices.
Okay.
Something like yoga, any type of yoga, whether it's a deep stretch or a yin yoga, a vinyasa yoga, or a kundalini yoga, that's, almost exclusively breath work, and kind of like energy movement work, like all of that can be really beneficial for stress too. Um, when it comes to, what do we do for the gut? Stress, moderating that has a big impact. But then you do want to get a good variety of fruits and veggies and plants in. Recently I attended this training on the gut microbiome, and, it went back to hormonal imbalance. But one of the
Mhm.
biggest kind of takeaways for me was that people who can kind of challenge themselves to get really curious with how many veggies they can get in a week, have the most diverse microbiomes, and then like the
Mm.
healthiest kind of immune response. And,
Okay.
so numbers, like this is going to sound really overwhelming almost, but like, can we get like 30, maybe even 40 different types of plants in within
Oh
a week,
wow. That's
right?
crazy. Yeah.
And I think it takes a lot of mental thought.
Yeah.
But the example that I gave a patient lately, she does smoothies a lot of times for like a post-workout or a breakfast, and she
Mhm.
routinely puts cherries in it. Okay, like maybe one day is raspberries, maybe one day is blueberries, maybe one day is strawberries. Already you've got 4 different things, right? So we're
Yeah.
already like a lot closer to that goal,
Yeah.
with just changing a couple little things out. So variety is awesome. And then, when it comes to the environmental, kind of what we come across with on a daily basis, pick your thing. I think everybody kind of has these experiences where it's like, oh, like I realize now that this might not be the best thing for me. My personal one recently is I realized that the dishwashing detergent that I was using actually like has a lot of fragrances and dyes and stuff in it. And I was like, you know what? There might just be a better option. So I did a little bit of research, found a better option, and it's on the way to my house, and it'll be here sometime later this month. So I think we can, especially with type A, personalities, people that are very driven, we can kind of think we need to change everything at once.
Yeah.
Just pick that one thing, make a change, stick with it for a little bit, and then pick the next thing that, is highest on your radar for what you want to improve just to feel a little bit better.
Yeah. That's kind of like one thing that, we try and do with competitive CrossFitters as well, is like always like one step at a time, right? Like you're not doing what CrossFit Games athlete is doing the first day you step into the gym, right?
Yeah.
It takes time to build up into that. And I think the same thing, kind of like what you were saying, was, start with step one and build that habit. And then from there, move on and find your next habit that's going to help continually progress your health.
Yes. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, that's very cool. Cool. Yeah. Well, I think we hit on a lot here. Hopefully that was pretty informative for people.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you have anything?
Yeah, I was just going to say, if you do have anyone who this podcast and even conversations with people that they're like, oh, like that sounds like something that I might want to talk to someone about, our website, super user friendly when it comes to, booking a session with me or with one of our providers, just to support you in your physical, like your physicality, your endurance, and your overall like longevity and health. Because we really are passionate about supporting people feeling their best in everything they want to achieve. And so that's, Stat Wellness. Feel free to Google us, and we would love to just be able to work with anyone who this resonated even a little bit. There might be something for you.
Yeah. And even from like most of our clientele is competitive CrossFitters, but even from a competitive CrossFitter standpoint, like if you're not at optimal health or close to it, you're not going to be creating adaptation, which means you're not going to be creating progress. So all of this applies to competitive CrossFit, competitive performance. Is you need health is step one, and then performance is step two. So hopefully this was some good takeaways for that particular population as well. So
totally. That's awesome.
So sorry, what was your website again?
Yes. So www.statwellness.com.
Cool. And you guys have a Instagram as well?
We do, at Stat Wellness.
Okay. And then how do you do anything on your personal Instagram or?
No. And I keep meaning to kind of set up this like professional one. And I'm one of those people that I am either like way in the rabbit hole of like the TikTok and all the cat videos on Instagram, or I'm like not on it at all. And I actually just, when we talk about bringing balance into our lives and working on stress, I'm just starting to try this thing like truly this week, where my Instagram time is Tuesday, Thursday, and Sunday. And just to see if that brings a little bit more balance back. So all that to say, if you find me on Instagram right now, it's mostly just going to be pictures of my cats. And maybe eventually down the road, I'll have something more tailored to my passions. It's a work in progress.
Yeah. Step one, right? And then build from there.
But I do routinely do like takeovers on the Stat Instagram page. And we've got a ton of amazing providers that give so much beneficial information there. So.
Okay, sweet. Yeah. So if you guys are listening, you can definitely give them a follow.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, Sarah, thank you for coming on. It was very fun to chat with you here.
Thanks, Kyle. I enjoyed it a lot. Yeah.
Yeah. Hopefully we can catch up soon again here. So
sounds great. I'd be happy to come back.
Awesome. Well, thanks for listening, guys. If you guys are following on YouTube, please hit that like and subscribe button. You guys can follow us on Instagram as well at blacklisted.hq. If you're listening on another platform, please head over to our YouTube channel and give us a follow on Instagram as well. Thanks again, Sarah, and we'll catch you guys next time.
Thanks, Kyle.